This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Luke Nelson. The Tin Woodman of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 16. Captain Fighter. "Are you really a soldier?" asked Woot when they had all watched this strange tin person parade up and down the path and proudly flourish his sword. "I was a soldier," was the reply, "but I've been a prisoner to Mr. Rust so long that I don't know exactly what I am." "But, dear me!" cried the Tin Woodman, sadly perplexed, "how came you to be made of tin?" "That," answered the soldier, "is a sad, sad story. I was in love with the beautiful Munchkin girl, who lived with a wicked witch. The witch did not wish me to marry the girl, so she enchanted my sword, which began hacking me to pieces. When I lost my legs, I went to the tinsmith, Coklat, and he made me some tin legs. When I lost my arms, Coklat made me tin arms, and when I lost my head, he made me this fine one out of tin. It was the same way with my body, and finally it was all tin. But I was not unhappy, for Coklat made a good job of me, having had experience in making another tin man before me." "Yes," observed the Tin Woodman, "it was Coklat who made me. But tell me, what was the name of the Munchkin girl you were in love with?" "She is called Nimmie Amee," said the Tin Soldier. Hearing this, they were all so astonished that they were silent for a time, regarding the stranger with wondering looks. Finally, the Tin Woodman ventured to ask, "And did Nimmie Amee return your love?" "Not at first," admitted the soldier. "When first I marched into the forest and met her, she was weeping over the loss of her former sweetheart, a woodman whose name was Nick Chopper." "That is me," said the Tin Woodman. "She told me he was nicer than a soldier, because he was all made of tin and shone beautifully in the sun. She said a tin man appealed to her artistic instincts more than an ordinary meat man, as I was then. But I did not despair, because her tin sweetheart had disappeared and could not be found. And finally Nimmie Amee permitted me to call upon her, and we became friends. It was then that the Wicked Witch discovered me and became furiously angry when I said I wanted to marry the girl. She enchanted my sword, as I said, and then my troubles began. When I got my tin legs, Nimmie Amee began to take an interest in me. When I got my tin arms, she began to like me better than ever. And when I was all made of tin, she said I looked like her dear Nick Chopper, and she would be willing to marry me. The day of our wedding was set, and it turned out to be a rainy day. Nevertheless, I started out to get Nimmie Amee, because the witch had been absent for some time, and we meant to elope before she got back. As I traveled the forest paths, the rain wetted my joints, but I paid no attention to this because my thoughts were all on my wedding with beautiful Nimmie Amee, and I could think of nothing else until suddenly my legs stopped moving. Then my arms rested at the joints, and I became frightened and cried to help, for now I was unable to oil myself. No one heard my calls, and before long my jaws rusted, and I was unable to utter another sound. So I stood helpless in this spot, hoping some wanderer would come my way and save me. But this forest path is seldom used, and I've been standing here so long that I have lost all track of time. In my mind I composed poetry and sang songs, but not a sound have I been able to utter. But this desperate condition has now been relieved by your coming my way, and I must thank you for my rescue." "This is wonderful," said the Scarecrow, heaving a stuffy, long sigh. I think Coklat was wrong to make two tin men just alike, and the strangest thing of all is that both you tin men fell in love with the same girl." "As for that," returned the soldier, seriously, "I must admit that I lost my ability to love when I lost my meat heart. Coklat gave me a tin heart, to be sure, but it doesn't love anything, as far as I can discover, and merely rattles against my tin ribs, which makes me wish I had no heart at all." "Yet, in spite of this condition, you are going to marry Nimmie Amee?" "Well, you see, I had promised to marry her, and I am an honest man and always try to keep my promises. I didn't like to disappoint the poor girl, who had been disappointed by one tin man already." "That was not my fault," declared the Emperor of the Winkies. Then he related how he also had rested in the forest, and after a long time had been rescued by Dorothy and the Scarecrow, and had traveled with them to the Emerald City in search of a heart that could love. "If you have found such a heart, sir," said the soldier, "I will gladly allow you to marry Nimmie Amee in my place." "If she loves you best, sir," answered the Woodman, "I shall not interfere with your wedding her. For, to be quite frank with you, I cannot yet love Nimmie Amee as I did before I became tin." "Still, one of you ought to marry the poor girl," remarked Woot, "and if she likes tin men, there is not much choice between you. Why don't you draw lots for her?" "That wouldn't be right," said the Scarecrow. "The girl should be permitted to choose her own husband," asserted Polychrome. "You should both go to her and allow her to take her choice. Then she will surely be happy." "That, to me, seems a very fair arrangement," said the Tin Soldier. "I agree to it," said the Tin Woodman, shaking the hand of his twin to show the matter was settled. "May I ask your name, sir?" he continued. "Before I was so cut up," replied the other, "I was known as Captain Fyter, but afterward I was merely called the Tin Soldier." "Well, Captain, if you are agreeable, let us now go to Nimmie Amee's house and let her choose between us." "Very well, and if we meet the Witch, we will both fight her, you with your axe and I with my sword." "The Witch is destroyed," announced the Scarecrow, and as they walked away he told the Tin Soldier of much that had happened in the land of Oz since he had stood rusted in the forest. "I must have stood there longer than I had imagined," he said thoughtfully.
End of chapter 16.
LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Luke Nelson. The Tin Woodman of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 17. The Workshop of Coklat. It was not more than a 2 hours' journey to the house where Nimmie Amee had lived, but when our travelers arrived there, they found the place deserted. The door was partly off its hinges, the roof had fallen in at the rear, and the interior of the cottage was thick with dust. Not only was the place vacant, but it was evident that no one had lived there for a long time. "I suppose," said the Scarecrow as they all stood looking wonderingly at the ruined house, "that after the Wicked Witch was destroyed, Nimmie Amee became lonely and went somewhere else to live." "One could scarcely expect a young girl to live all alone in a forest," added Woot. "She would want company, of course, and so I believe she has gone where other people live." "And perhaps she is still crying her poor little heart out because no tin man comes to marry her," suggested Polychrome. "Well, in that case, it is the clear duty of you two tin persons to seek Nimmie Amee until you find her," declared the Scarecrow. "I do not know where to look for the girl," said the Tin Soldier, "for I am almost a stranger to this part of the country." "I was born here," said the Tin Woodman, "but the forest has few inhabitants except the wild beasts. I cannot think of anyone living near here with whom Nimmie Amee might care to live." "Why not go to Coklat and ask him what has become of the girl?" proposed Polychrome. That struck them all as being a good suggestion, so once more they started to tramp through the forest, taking the direct path to Coklat's house. For both the Tin Twins knew the way, having followed it many times. Coklat lived at the far edge of the great forest, his house facing the broad plains of the Munchkin country that lay to the eastward. But when they came to this residence by the forest's edge, the tinsmith was not at home. It was a pretty place, all painted dark blue with trimmings of a lighter blue. There was a neat blue fence around the yard, and several blue benches had been placed underneath the shady blue trees which marked the line between forest and plain. There was a blue lawn before the house, which was a good-sized building. Coklat lived in the front part of the house, and had his workshop in the back part, where he had also built a lean-to addition in order to give him more room. Although they found the tinsmith absent on their arrival, there was smoke coming out of his chimney, which proved that he would soon return. "And perhaps Nimmie Amee will be with him," said the Scarecrow in a cheerful voice. While they waited, the Tin Woodman went to the door of the workshop and, finding it unlocked, entered and looked curiously around the room where he had been made. "It almost seems like home to me," he told his friends, who had followed him in. "The first time I came here I had lost a leg, so I had to carry it in my hand while I hopped on the other leg all the way from the place in the forest where the enchanted axe cut me. I remember that old Coklat carefully put my meat leg in a barrel. I think that is the same barrel, still standing in the corner yonder. And then at once he began to make a tin leg for me. He worked fast and with skill, and I was much interested in the job." "My experience was much the same," said the Tin Soldier. "I used to bring all the parts of me which the enchanted sword had cut away here to the tinsmith, and Coklat would put them into the barrel." "I wonder," said Woot, "if those cast-off parts of you two unfortunates are still in that barrel in the corner." "I suppose so," replied the Tin Woodman. "In the Land of Oz no part of a living creature can ever be destroyed." "If that is true, how was the Wicked Witch destroyed?" inquired Woot. "Why, she was very old and was all dried up and withered before Oz became a fairyland," explained the Scarecrow. "Only her magic arts had kept her alive so long, and when Dorothy's house fell upon her, she just turned to dust and was blown away and scattered by the wind. I do not think, however, that the parts cut away from these two young men could ever be entirely destroyed, and if they are still in those barrels, they are likely to be just the same as when the enchanted axe or sword severed them." "Doesn't matter, however," said the Tin Woodman. "Our tin bodies are more brilliant and durable, and quite satisfy us." "Yes, the tin bodies are best," agreed the Tin Soldier. "Nothing can hurt them." "Unless they get dented or rusted," said Woot, but both the tin men frowned on him. Scraps of tin of all shapes and sizes lay scattered round the workshop. There were hammers and anvils and soldering irons and a charcoal furnace, and many other tools such as a tinsmith works with. Against two of the side walls had been built about workbenches, and in the center of the room was a long table. At the end of the shop, which adjoined the dwelling, were several cupboards. After examining the interior of the workshop until his curiosity was satisfied, Woot said, "I think I will go outside until Coklat comes. It does not seem quite proper for us to take possession of his house while he is absent." "That is true," agreed the Scarecrow, and they were all about to leave the room when the Tin Woodman said, "Wait a minute," and they halted in obedience to the command.
End of chapter 17.
LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Luke Nelson. The Tin Woodman of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 18. The Tin Woodman Talks to Himself. The Tin Woodman had just noticed the cupboards and was curious to know what they contained, so he went to one of them and opened the door. There were shelves inside, and upon one of the shelves, which was about on level with his tin chin, the Emperor discovered a head. It looked like a doll's head, only it was larger, and he soon saw it was the head of some person. It was facing the Tin Woodman, and as the cupboard door swung back, the eyes of the head slowly opened and looked at him. The Tin Woodman was not at all surprised, for in the land of Oz one runs into magic at every turn. "Dear me," said the Tin Woodman, staring hard. "It seems as if I met you somewhere before. Good morning, sir." "You have the advantage of me," replied the head. "I never saw you before in my life." "Still, your face is very familiar," persisted the Tin Woodman. "Pardon me, but may I ask you if you if you ever had a body?" "Yes, at one time," answered the head, "but that is so long ago I can't remember it. Did you think," with a pleasant smile, "that I was born just as I am? That a head would be created without a body?" "No, of course not," said the other. "But how came you to lose your body?" "Well, I can't recollect the details. You'll have to ask Coklat about it," returned the head. "For curious as it may seem to you, my memory is not good since my separation from the rest of me. I still possess my brains and my intellect is as good as ever, but my memory of some of the events I formerly experienced is quite hazy." "How long have you been in this cupboard?" asked the Emperor. "I don't know." "Haven't you a name?" "Oh, yes," said the head. "I used to be called Nick Chopper, when I was a woodman and cut down trees for a living." "Good gracious!" cried the Tin Woodman in astonishment. "If you are Nick Chopper's head, then you are me, or I'm you, or what relation are we, anyhow?" "Don't ask me," replied the head. "For my part, I'm not anxious to claim relationship with any common manufactured article like you. You may be all right in your class, but your class isn't my class. You're tin." The poor Emperor felt so bewildered that for a time he could only stare at his old head in silence. Then he said, "I must admit that I wasn't at all bad looking before I became tin. You're almost handsome for meat. If your hair was combed, you'd be quite attractive." "How do you expect me to comb my hair without help?" demanded the head indignantly. "I used to keep it smooth and neat when I had arms, but after I was removed from the rest of me, my hair got mussed, and old Coklat never has combed it for me." "I'll speak to him about it," said the Tin Woodman. "Do you remember loving a pretty Munchkin girl named Nimmie Amee?" "No," answered the head, "that is a foolish question. The heart in my body, when I had a body, might have loved someone, for all I know, but a head isn't made to love, it's made to think." "Oh, do you think, then?" "I used to think." "You must have been shut up in this cupboard for years and years. What have you thought about in all that time?" Nothing. That's another foolish question. A little reflection will convince you that I have nothing to think about except the boards on the inside of the cupboard door. It didn't take me long to think of everything about those boards that could be thought of. Then, of course, I quit thinking." "And are you happy?" "Happy? What's that?" "Don't you know what happiness is?" inquired the Tin Woodman. "I haven't the faintest idea whether it's round or square, or black or white, or what it is. And if you will pardon my lack of interest in it, I will say that I don't care." The Tin Woodman was much puzzled by these answers. His traveling companions had grouped themselves at his back, and had fixed their eyes on the head and listened to the conversation with much interest, but until now they had not interrupted because they thought the Tin Woodman had the best right to talk to his own head and their new acquaintance with it. But now the Tin Soldier remarked, "I wonder if my old head happens to be in any of these cupboards," and he proceeded to open all the cupboard doors, but no other head was to be found in any of the shelves. "Oh well, never mind," said Woot the Wanderer. "I can't imagine what anyone wants of a cast-off head, anyhow." "I can understand the soldier's interest," asserted Polychrome, dancing around the grimy workshop until her draperies formed a cloud round her dainty form. "For sentimental reasons a man might like to see his old head once more, just as one likes to visit an old home." "And then to kiss it good-bye," added the Scarecrow. "I hope that tin thing won't try to kiss me good-bye!" exclaimed the Tin Woodman's former head. "And I don't see what right you folks have to disturb my peace and comfort, either." "You belong to me," the Tin Woodman declared. "I do not. You and I are one." "We've been parted," asserted the head. "It would be unnatural for me to have any interest in a man made of tin. Please close the door and leave me alone." "I did not think that my old head could be so disagreeable," said the Emperor. I'm quite ashamed of myself, meaning you." "You ought to be glad that I've enough sense to know what my rights are," retorted the head. "In this cupboard I am leading a simple life, peaceful and dignified, and when a mob of people in whom I am not interested disturb me, they are disagreeable ones, and not I." With a sigh, the Tin Woodman closed and latched the cupboard door and turned away. "Well," said the Tin Soldier, "if my old head would have treated me as coldly and in so unfriendly a manner as your old head has treated you, friend Chopper, I'm glad I could not find it." "Yes, I'm rather surprised at my head myself," replied the Tin Woodman thoughtfully. "I thought I had a more pleasant disposition when I was made of meat." But just then old Coklat the tinsmith arrived, and he seemed surprised to find so many visitors. Coklat was a stout man and a short man. He had his sleeves rolled above his elbows, showing muscular arms, and he wore a leathern apron that covered all the front of him and was so long that Woot was surprised he didn't step on it and trip whenever he walked. And Coklat had a gray beard that was almost as long as his apron, and his head was bald on the top, and his ears stuck out from his head like two fans. Over his eyes, which were bright and twinkling, he wore big spectacles. It was easy to see that the tinsmith was a kind-hearted man, as well as a merry and agreeable one. "Oh ho!" he cried in a joyous bass voice. "There are both my tin men come to visit me, and they and their friends are welcome indeed. I'm very proud of you two characters, I assure you, for you are so perfect that you are proof that I'm a good workman. Sit down, all of you, if you can find anything to sit on, and tell me why you are here." So they found seats and all told him all of their adventures that they thought he would like to know. Coklat was glad to learn that Nick Chopper, the Tin Woodman, was now Emperor of the Winkies, a friend of Ozma of Oz, and the tinsmith was also interested in the Scarecrow and Polychrome. He turned the straw man around, examining him curiously, and patted him on all sides, and then said: "You are certainly wonderful, but I think you would be more durable and steady on your legs if you were made of tin. Would you like me to—" "No, indeed!" interrupted the Scarecrow hastily. "I like myself better as I am." But to Polychrome the tinsmith said: "Nothing could improve you, my dear, for you are the most beautiful maiden I have ever seen. It is pure happiness just to look at you." "That is praise indeed from so skillful a workman," replied the Rainbow's Daughter, laughing and dancing in and out of the room. "Then it must be this boy you wish me to help," said Coklat, looking at Woot. "No," said Woot, "we are not here to seek your skill, but have come merely to you for information." Then, between them, they related their search for Nimmie Amee, whom the Tin Woodman explained he had resolved to marry, yet who had promised to become the bride of the Tin Soldier before he unfortunately became rusted. And when that story was told, they asked Coklat if he knew what had become of Nimmie Amee. "Not exactly," replied the old man, "but I know that she wept bitterly when the Tin Soldier did not come to marry her as he had promised to do. The old witch was so provoked at the girl's tears that she beat Nimmie Amee with her crooked stick, and then hobbled away to gather some magic herbs, with which she intended to transform the girl into an old hag, so that no one would again love her or care to marry her. It was while she was away on this errand that Dorothy's house fell on the Wicked Witch, and she turned to dust and blew away. When I heard this good news, I sent Nimmie Amee to find the silver shoes which the witch had worn, but Dorothy had taken with her to the Emerald City." "Yes, we know all about these silver shoes," said the Scarecrow. "Well," continued Coklat, "after that, Nimmie Amee decided to go away from the forest and live with some people she was acquainted with who had a house on Mount Munch. I have never seen the girl since." "Do you know the name of the people on Mount Munch with whom she went to live?" asked the Tin Woodman. "No, Nimmie Amee did not mention her friend's name, and I did not ask her. She took with her all that she could carry of the goods that were in the witch's house, and she told me that I could have the rest. But when I went there I found nothing worth taking, except some magic powders that I did not know how to use, and a bottle of magic glue." "What is magic glue?" asked Woot. "It is a magic preparation with which to mend people when they cut themselves. One time, long ago, I cut off one of my fingers by accident, and I carried it to the witch, who took down her bottle and glued it on again for me. See," showing them his finger, "it is as good as it ever was. No one else that I ever heard of had this magic glue, and of course when Nick Chopper cut himself to pieces with his enchanted axe and Captain Fighter cut himself to pieces with his enchanted sword, the witch would not mend them or allow me to glue them together because she had herself wickedly enchanted the axe and sword. Nothing remained but for me to make them new parts out of tin. But, as you see, tin bodies are a great improvement on their meat bodies." "Very true," said the Tin Soldier. "I quite agree with you," said the Tin Woodman. "I happened to find my old head in your cupboard a while ago, and certainly it is not as desirable a head as the tin one I now wear." "By the way," said the Tin Soldier, "whatever became of my old head, Coklat?" "And of the different parts of our bodies," added the Tin Woodman. "Let me think a minute," replied Coklat. "If I remember right, you two boys used to bring me most of your parts when they were cut off, and I saved them in that barrel in the corner. You must not have brought me all the parts, for when I made Chopfight I had hard work finding enough pieces to complete the job. I finally had to finish him with one arm." "Who is Chopfyt?" inquired Woot. "Oh, haven't I told you about Chopfyt?" exclaimed Coklat. "Of course not, and he's quite a curiosity, too. You'll be interested in hearing about Chopfyt. This is how he happened. One day, after the witch had been destroyed and Nimmie Amee had gone to live with her friends on Mount Munch, I was looking around the shop for something and came upon the bottle of magic glue which I had brought from the old witch's house. It occurred to me to piece together the odds and ends of you two people, which of course were just as good as ever, and see if I couldn't make a man out of them. If I succeeded, I would have an assistant to help me with my work, and I thought it would be a clever idea to put to some practical use the scraps of Nick Chopper and Captain Fighter. There were two perfectly good heads in my cupboard, and a lot of feet and legs and parts of bodies in the barrel, so I set to work to see what I could do. First I pieced together a body, gluing it with the witch's magic glue, which worked perfectly. That was the hardest part of my job, however, because the bodies didn't match up well and some parts were missing. But by using a piece of Captain Fighter here and a piece of Nick Chopper there, I finally got together a very decent body, with heart and all the trimmings complete. "Whose heart did you use in making?" asked the Tin Woodman anxiously. "The body? I can't tell, for the parts had no tags on them, and one heart looks much like another. After the body was completed, I glued two fine legs and feet onto it. One leg was Nick Chopper's and one was Captain Fighter's, and finding one leg longer than the other, I trimmed it down to make them match. I was much disappointed to find that I had but one arm. There was an extra leg in the barrel, but I could find only one arm. Having glued this onto the body, I was ready for the head, which I had some difficulty in making up my mind which head to use. Finally, I shut my eyes and reached out my hand toward the cupboard shelf, and the first head I touched I glued upon my new man. "It was mine," declared the Tin Soldier gloomily. "No, it was mine," asserted the Coklat, "for I had given you another in exchange for it, the beautiful tin head you now wear. When the glue had dried, my man was quite an interesting fellow. I named him Chopfyt, using part of Nick Chopper's name and a part of Captain Fighter's name, because he was a mixture of both of your cast-off parts. Chopfyt was interesting, as I said, but he did not prove a very agreeable companion. He complained bitterly because I had given him but one arm, as if it were my fault, and he grumbled because the suit of blue Munchkin clothes which I got from a neighbor did not fit him perfectly." "Ah, that was because he was wearing my old head," remarked the Tin Soldier. "I remember that head used to be very particular about its clothes." "As an assistant," the old tinsmith continued, "Chopfyt was not a success. He was awkward with tools and was always hungry. He demanded something to eat 6 or 8 times a day, so I wondered if I had fitted his insides properly. Indeed, Chopfyt ate so much that little food was left for myself, so when he proposed one day to go out into the world and seek adventure, I was delighted to be rid of him. I even made him a tin arm to take the place of the missing one. That pleased him very much, so that we parted good friends." "What became of Chopfyt after that?" the Scarecrow inquired. "I had never heard. He started off towards the east, into the plains of the Munchkin country, and that was the last I ever saw of him." "Seems to me," said the Tin Woodman reflectively, "that you did wrong in making a man out of our cast-off parts. It is evident that Chopfyt could, with justice, claim relationship with both of us." "Do not worry about that," advised Coklat cheerfully. "It is not likely that you will ever meet the fellow, and if you should meet him, he doesn't know who he is made of, for I never told him the secret of his manufacture. Indeed, you are the only ones who know of it, and you may keep the secret to yourselves if you wish to." "Never mind Chopfyt," said the Scarecrow. "Our business now is to find poor Nimmie Amee and let her choose her tin husband. To do that, it seems, from the information Coklat has given us, we must travel to Mount Munch." "If that's the program, let us start at once," suggested Woot. So they all went outside, where they found Polychrome dancing about among the trees and talking with the birds and laughing as merrily as if she had not lost her rainbow and so been separated from all her fairy sisters. They told her they were going to Mount Munch, and she replied, "Very well, I am as likely to find my rainbow there as here, and any other place is as likely as there. It all depends on the weather. Do you think it looks like rain?" They shook their heads, and Polychrome laughed again and danced on after them when they resumed their journey.
End of Chapter 18.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Luke Nelson. The Tin Woodman of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 19. The Invisible Country. They were proceeding so easily and comfortably on their way to Mount Munch that Woot said in a serious tone of voice, "I'm afraid something is going to happen." "Why?" asked Polychrome, dancing around the group of travelers. "Because," said the boy thoughtfully, "I've noticed that when we have the least reason for getting into trouble, something is sure to go wrong. Just now the weather is delightful, the grass is beautifully blue and quite soft to our feet. The mountain we are seeking shows clearly in the distance, and there is no reason anything should happen to delay us in getting there. Our troubles all seem to be over, and, well, that's why I'm afraid," he added with a sigh. "Dear me," remarked the Scarecrow, "what unhappy thoughts you have, to be sure. This is proof that born brains cannot equal manufactured brains, for my brains dwell only on facts and never borrow trouble. When there is occasion for my brains to think, they think, but I would be ashamed of my brains if they kept shooting out thoughts that were merely fears and imaginings, such as do no good but are likely to do harm." "For my part," said the Tin Woodman, "I do not think at all, but allow my velvet heart to guide me at all times." "The tinsmith filled my hollow head with scraps and clippings of tin," said the soldier, "and he told me they would do nicely for brains. But when I began to think, the tin scraps rattle around and get so mixed that I'm soon bewildered, so I try not to think. My tin heart is almost as useless to me, for it is hard and cold, and so I'm sure the red velvet heart of my friend Nick Chopper is a better guide." "Thoughtless people are not unusual," observed the Scarecrow, "but I consider them more fortunate than those who have useless or wicked thoughts and do not try to curb them. Your oil can, friend Woodman, is filled with oil, but you only apply the oil to your joints, drop by drop, as you need it, and do not keep spilling it where it will do no good. Thoughts should be restrained in the same way as your oil, and only applied when necessary and for a good purpose. If used carefully, thoughts are good things to have." Polychrome laughed at him, for the Rainbow's Daughter knew more about thoughts than the Scarecrow did, but the others were so solemn, feeling they had been rebuked, and tramped on in silence. Suddenly, Woot, who was in the lead, looked around and found that all his comrades had mysteriously disappeared. But where could they have gone to? The broad plain was all about him, and there were neither trees nor bushes that could hide even a rabbit, nor any hole for one to fall into. Yet there he stood, alone. Surprise had caused him to halt, and with a thoughtful and puzzled expression on his face, he looked down at his feet. It startled him anew to discover that he had no feet. He reached out his hands, but he could not see them. He could feel his hands and arms and body. He stamped his feet on the grass and knew they were there, but in some strange way they had become invisible. While Woot stood wondering, a crash of metal sounded in his ears, and he heard two heavy metal bodies tumble to the earth just beside him. "Good gracious!" exclaimed the voice of the Tin Woodman. "Mercy me!" cried the voice of the Tin Soldier. "Why didn't you look where you were going?" asked the Tin Woodman reproachfully. "I did, but I couldn't see you," said the Tin Soldier. "Something has happened to my tin eyes. I can't see you, even now, nor can I see anyone else." "It's the same way with me," admitted the Tin Woodman. Woot couldn't see either of them, although he heard them plainly, and just then something smashed against him unexpectedly and knocked him over. But it was only the straw-stuffed body of the Scarecrow that fell upon him, and while he could not see the Scarecrow, he managed to push him off and rose to his feet just as Polychrome whirled against him and made him tumble again. Sitting upon the ground, the boy asked, "Can you see us, Polly?" "No, indeed," answered the Rainbow's Daughter. "We've all become invisible." "How did it happen, do you suppose?" inquired the Scarecrow, lying where he had fallen. "We have met with no enemy," answered Polychrome, "so it must be that this part of the country has the magic quality of making people invisible, even fairies falling under the charm. We can see the grass and the flowers and the stretch of plain before us, and we can still see Mount Munch in the distance, but we cannot see ourselves or one another." "Well, what are we to do about it?" demanded Woot. "I think this magic affects only a small part of the plain," replied Polychrome. "Perhaps there is only a streak of the country where an enchantment makes people become invisible. So, if we get together and hold hands, we can travel toward Mount Munch till the enchanted streak is past." "All right," said Woot, jumping up. "Give me your hand, Polychrome. Where are you?" "Here," she answered. "Whistle, Woot, and keep whistling until I come to you." So Woot whistled, and presently Polychrome found him and grasped his hand. "Someone must help me up," said the Scarecrow, lying near them. So they found the straw man and sat him upon his feet, after which he held fast to Polychrome's other hand. Nick Chopper and the Tin Soldier had managed to scramble up without assistance, but it was awkward for them, and the Tin Woodman said, "I don't seem to stand straight somehow, but my joints all work, so I guess I can walk." Guided by his voice, they reached his side, where Woot grasped his tin fingers so they might keep together. The Tin Soldier was standing nearby, and the Scarecrow soon touched him and took hold of his arm. "I hope you're not too wobbly," said the straw man, "for if two of us walk unsteadily, we will be sure to fall." "I'm not wobbly," the Tin Soldier assured him, "but I'm certain that one of my legs is shorter than the other. I can't see it, to tell what's wrong, but I'll limp on with the rest of you until we are out of this enchanted territory." They now formed a line, holding hands, and turning their faces toward Mount Munch, resumed their journey. They had not gone far, however, when a terrible growl saluted their ears. The sound seemed to come from a place just in front of him, so they halted abruptly and remained silent, listening with all their ears. "I smell straw!" cried a hoarse, harsh voice, with more growls and snarls. "I smell straw, and I am a hippogriff who loves straw and eats all he can find. I want to eat this straw. Where is it? Where is it?" The Scarecrow, hearing this, trembled, but kept silent. All the others were silent too, hoping that the invisible beast would be unable to find them. But the creature sniffed the odor of the straw and drew nearer and nearer to them until he reached the Tin Woodman on one end of the line. It was a big beast, and it smelled of the Tin Woodman and grated 2 rows of enormous teeth against the Emperor's tin body. "Bah! That's not straw," said the harsh voice, and the beast advanced along the line to Woot. "Meat! Pooh, you're no good. I can't eat meat," grumbled the beast, and passed on to Polychrome. "Sweetmeats and perfume, cobwebs and dew. Nothing to eat in a fairy like you," said the creature. Now the Scarecrow was next to Polychrome in the line. He realized if the beast devoured his straw, he would be helpless for a long time, because the last farmhouse was far behind them and only grass covered the vast expanse of plain. So in his fright he let go of Polychrome's hand and put the hand of the Tin Soldier in that of the Rainbow's Daughter. Then he slipped back of the line and went to the other end, where he silently seized the Tin Woodman's hand. Meantime, the beast had smelled the Tin Soldier and found he was the last of the line. "That's funny," growled the Hippogriff. "I can smell straw, but I can't find it. Well, it's here somewhere, and I must hunt around until I do find it, for I'm hungry." His voice was now at the left of them, so they started on, hoping to avoid him, and traveled as fast as they could in the direction of Mount Munch. "I don't like this invisible country," said Woot with a shudder. "We can't tell how many dreadful invisible beasts are roaming around us, or what danger we'll come to next." "Quit thinking about danger, please," said the Scarecrow warningly. "Why?" asked the boy. "If you think of some dreadful thing, it's liable to happen. But if you don't think of it and no one else thinks of it, it just can't happen. Do you see?" "No," answered Woot. "I won't be able to see much of anything until we escape from this enchantment." But they got out of the invisible strip of country as suddenly as they had entered it, and the instant they got out they stopped short, for just before them was a deep ditch running at right angles as far as their eyes could see and stopping all further progress toward Mount Munch. "It's not so very wide," said Woot, "but I'm sure none of us can jump across it." Polychrome began to laugh, and the Scarecrow said, "What's the matter?" "Look at the tin men," she said, with another burst of merry laughter. Woot and the Scarecrow looked, and the tin men looked at it themselves. "It was the collision," said the Tin Woodman regretfully. "I knew something was wrong with me, and now I can see that my side is dented in so that I lean over toward the left. It was the Soldier's fault. He shouldn't have been so careless." "It is your fault that my right leg is bent, making it shorter than the other, so that I limp badly," retorted the Soldier. "You shouldn't have stood where I was walking." "You shouldn't have walked where I was standing," replied the Tin Woodman. It was almost a quarrel, so Polychrome said soothingly, "Never mind, friends. As soon as we have time, I am sure we can straighten the Soldier's leg and get the dent out of the Woodman's body. The Scarecrow needs patting into shape, too, for he had a bad tumble, but our first task is to get over this ditch." "Yes, the ditch is the most important thing just now," added Woot. They were standing in a row, looking hard at the unexpected barrier, when a fierce growl from behind them all made them all turn quickly. Out of the invisible country marched a huge beast with a thick, leathery skin and a surprisingly long neck. The head on the top of this neck was broad and flat, and the eyes and mouth were very big, and the nose and ears very small. When the head was drawn down toward the beast's shoulders, the neck was all wrinkles, but the head could shoot up very high indeed if the creature wished it to. "Dear me!" exclaimed the Scarecrow. "This must be the hippogriff." "Quite right," said the beast, "and you're the straw which I'm going to eat for my dinner. Oh, how I love straw! I hope you don't resent my affectionate appetite?" With its 4 great legs it advanced straight towards the Scarecrow, but the Tin Woodman and the Tin Soldier both sprang in front of their friend and flourished their weapons. "Keep off!" said the Tin Woodman warningly, "or I'll chop you with my axe." "Keep off!" said the Tin Soldier, "or I'll cut you with my sword." "Would you really do that?" asked the hippogriff in a disappointed voice. "We would," they both replied, and the Tin Woodman added, "The Scarecrow is our friend, and he would be useless without his straw stuffing. So, as we are comrades, faithful and true, we will defend our friend's stuffing against all enemies." The hippogriff sat down and looked at them sorrowfully. "When one has made up his mind to have a meal of delicious straw, and then finds he can't have it, it is certainly hard luck," he said. "And what good is the straw man to you or to himself when the ditch keeps you from going any farther?" "Well, we can go back again," suggested Woot. "True," said the Hippo. "And if you do, you'll be as disappointed as I am. That's some comfort, anyhow." The travelers looked at the beast. Then they looked across the ditch at the level plain beyond. On the other side the grass had grown tall, and the sun had dried it, so there was a fine crop of hay that only needed to be cut and stacked. "Why don't you cross over and eat the hay?" the boy asked the beast. "I'm not fond of hay," replied the hippogriff. "Straw is much more delicious, to my notion, and it's more scarce in this neighborhood, too. Also, I must confess that I can't get across the ditch, for my body is too heavy and clumsy for me to jump the distance. I can stretch my neck across, though, and you will notice that I've nibbled the hay on the farther edge, not because I liked it, but because one must eat, and if one can't get the sort of food he desires, he must take what is offered or go hungry." "Ah, I see you are a philosopher," remarked the Scarecrow. "No, I'm just a hippogriff," was the reply. Polychrome was not afraid of the big beast. She danced close to him and said, "If you can stretch your neck across the ditch, why not help us over? We can sit on your big head, one at a time, then you can lift us across." "Yes, I can, it is true," answered the Hippo, "but I refuse to do it. Unless," he added, and stopped short. "Unless what?" allowed Polychrome. "Unless you allow me to eat the straw with which the Scarecrow is stuffed." "No," said the Rainbow's Daughter, "that is too high a price to pay. Our friend's straw is nice and fresh, for he was restuffed only a little while ago." "I know," agreed the Hippogriff. "That's why I want it. If it was old musty straw, I wouldn't care for it." "Please lift us across," pleaded Polychrome. "No," replied the beast. "Since you refuse my generous offer, I can be as stubborn as you are." After that they were all silent for a time, but then the Scarecrow said bravely: "Friends, let us agree to the beast's terms. Give him my straw and carry the rest of me with you across the ditch. Once on the other side, the Tin Soldier can cut some of the hay with his sharp sword, and you can stuff me with that material until we reach a place where there is straw. It is true that I have been stuffed with straw all my life. It will be somewhat humiliating to be filled with common hay, but I am willing to sacrifice my pride in a good cause. Moreover, to abandon our errand and so deprive the great Emperor of the Winkies, or this noble soldier, of his bride would be equally humiliating, if not more so." "You're a very honest and clever man," exclaimed the Hip po gy raf admiringly. "When I have eaten your head, perhaps I will also become clever." "You're not to eat my head, you know," returned the Scarecrow hastily. "My head isn't stuffed with straw, and I cannot part with it." "When one loses his head, he loses his brains." "Very well, then you may keep your head," said the beast. The Scarecrow's companions thanked him warmly for his loyal sacrifice to their mutual good, and then he laid down and permitted them to pull the straw from his body. As fast as they did this, the Hip po gy raf ate up the straw, and when all was consumed, Polychrome made a neat bundle of the clothes and boots and gloves and hat and said she would carry them, while Woot tucked the Scarecrow's head under his arm and promised to guard its safety. "Now then," said the Tin Woodman, "keep your promise, beast, and lift us over the ditch." But that was a fine dinner," said the Hippo, smacking his thick lips in satisfaction, "and I'm as good as my word. Sit on my head, one at a time, and I'll land you safely on the other side." He approached close to the edge of the ditch and squatted down. Polychrome climbed over his big body and sat herself lightly upon the flat head, holding the bundle of the Scarecrow's raiment in her hand. Slowly the elastic neck stretched out until it reached the far side of the ditch, when the beast lowered his head and permitted the beautiful fairy to leap to the ground. Woot made the queer journey next, and then the Tin Soldier, and then the Tin Woodman went over, and all were well pleased to have overcome this serious barrier to their progress. "Now, Soldier, cut the hay," said the Scarecrow's head, which was still held by Woot the Wanderer. "I'd like to, but I can't stoop over with my bent leg without falling," replied Captain Fyter. "What can we do about the leg, anyhow?" asked Woot, appealing to Polychrome. She danced around in a circle several times without replying, and the boy feared she had not heard him. But the Rainbow's Daughter was merely thinking upon the problem, and presently she paused beside the Tin Soldier and said: "I've been taught a little fairy magic, but I've never been asked to mend tin legs with it, so I'm not sure I can help you. It all depends on the goodwill of my unseen fairy guardians, so I'll try, and if I fail, you will be no worse off than you are now." She danced around the circle again, then laid both hands upon the twisted tin leg and sang in her sweet voice: "Fairy powers, come to my aid! This bent leg of tin is made. Make it straight and strong and true, and I'll render thanks to you." "Ah," murmured Captain Fyter in a glad voice, as she withdrew her hands and danced away, and they saw he was standing straight as ever, because his leg was as shapely and strong as it had been before his accident. The Tin Woodman had watched Polychrome with much interest, and he now said: "Please take the dent out of my side, Polly, for I am more crippled than was the soldier." So the Rainbow's Daughter touched his side lightly and sang: "Here's a dent by accident. Such a thing was never meant. Fairy powers so wondrous great make our dear Tin Woodman straight." "Good!" cried the Emperor, again standing erect and strutting around to show his fine figure. "Your fairy magic may not be able to accomplish all things, sweet Polychrome, but it works splendidly on tin. Thank you very much." "The hay! The hay!" pleaded the Scarecrow's head. "Oh, yes, the hay," said Woot. "What are you waiting for, Captain Fyter?" At once the Tin Soldier set to work cutting hay with his sword, and in a few minutes there was quite enough with which to stuff the Scarecrow's body. Woot and Polychrome did this, and it was no easy task, because the hay packed together more than straw, and as they had little experience in such work, their job, when completed, left the Scarecrow's arms and legs rather bunchy. Also, there was a hump on his back which made Woot laugh and say it reminded him of a camel. But it was the best they could do, and when the head was fastened onto the body, they asked how the Scarecrow felt. "A little heavy and not quite natural," he cheerfully replied, "but I'll get along somehow, until we reach a straw stack. Don't laugh at me, please, because I'm a little ashamed of myself, and I don't want to regret a good action." They started at once in the direction of Mount Munch, and as the Scarecrow proved very clumsy in his movements, Woot took one of his arms and the Tin Woodman the other, and so helped their friend to walk in a straight line. And the Rainbow's Daughter, as before, danced ahead of them, and behind them, and all around them, and they never minded her odd ways, because to them she was like a ray of sunshine.
End of chapter 19.
Recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Luke Nelson. The Tin Woodman of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 20. Overnight. The land of the Munchkins is full of surprises, as our travelers had already learned, and although Mount Munch was constantly growing larger as they advanced toward it, they knew it was still a long way off and were not certain by any means that they had escaped all danger or encountered their last adventure. The plain was broad, and as far as the eye could see there seemed to be a level stretch of country between them and the mountain. But toward evening they came upon a hollow in which stood a tiny blue Munchkin dwelling, with a green around it and fields of grain filling in all the rest of the hollow. They did not discover this place until they came close to the edge of it, because they were astonished at the sight that greeted them, because they had imagined that this part of the plain had no inhabitants. "It's a very small house," Woot declared. "I wonder who lives there." "The way to find out is to knock on the door and ask," replied the Tin Woodman. "Perhaps it is the home of Nimmie Amee." "Is she a dwarf?" asked the boy. "No, indeed. Nimmie Amee is a full-sized woman." "Then I'm sure she couldn't live in that little house," said Woot. "Let's go down," suggested the Scarecrow. "I'm almost sure I can see a straw stack in the back yard." They descended the hollow, which was rather steep at the sides, and soon came to the house, which was indeed rather small. Woot knocked upon a door that was not much higher than his waist, but got no reply. He knocked again, but not a sound was heard. "Smoke is coming out of the chimney," announced Polychrome, who was dancing lightly through the garden, where cabbages and beets and turnips and the like were growing finely. "Then someone surely lives here," said Woot, and knocked again. Now a window at the side of the house opened and a queer head appeared. It was white and hairy and had a long snout and little round eyes. The ears were hidden by a blue sunbonnet tied under the chin. "Oh, it's a pig!" exclaimed Woot. "Pardon me, I am Miss Squealina Swine, wife of Professor Grunter Swine, and this is our home," said the one in the window. "What do you want?" "What sort of a professor is your husband?" inquired the Tin Woodman curiously. "He is Professor of Cabbage Culture and Corn Perfection. He is very famous in his own family, and would be the wonder of the world if he went abroad," said Mrs. Swine in a voice that was half proud and half irritable. "I must also inform you intruders that the Professor is a dangerous individual, for he files his teeth every morning until they are sharp as needles. If you are butchers, you'd better run away and avoid trouble." "We are not butchers," the Tin Woodman assured her. Then what are you doing with that axe? And why has the other Tin Man a sword?" "They are the only weapons we have to defend our friends from their enemies," explained the Emperor of the Winkies, and Woot added, "Do not be afraid of us, Mrs. Swine, for we are harmless travelers. The Tin Men and the Scarecrow never eat anything, and Polychrome feasts only on dewdrops. As for me, I'm rather hungry, but there is plenty of food in your garden to satisfy me." Professor Swine now joined his wife at the window, looking rather scared in spite of the boy's assuring speech. He wore a blue Munchkin hat with pointed crown and broad brim, and big spectacles covered his eyes. He peeked around from behind his wife, and after looking hard at the strangers, he said: "My wisdom assures me that you are merely travelers, as you say, and not butchers. Butchers have reason to be afraid of meat, but you are safe. We cannot invite you in, for you are too big for our house, but the boy who eats is welcome to all the carrots and turnips he wants. Make yourselves at home in the garden and stay all night, if you like, but in the morning you must go away, for we are quiet people and do not care for company." "May I have some of your straw?" asked the Scarecrow. "Help yourself," replied Professor Swine. "For pigs, they're quite respectable," remarked Woot, as they all went toward the straw stack. "I'm glad they didn't invite us in," said Captain Fyter. "I hope I'm not too particular about my associates, but I draw the line at pigs." The Scarecrow was glad to be rid of his hay, for during the long walk it had sagged down and made him fat and squatty, more bumpy than at first. "I'm not especially proud," he said, "but I love a manly figure, such as only straw stuffing can create. I've not felt like myself since that hungry hippo ate my last straw." Polychrome and Woot set to work removing the hay, and then they selected the finest straw, crisp and golden, and with it stuffed the Scarecrow anew. He certainly looked better after the operation, and he was so pleased at being reformed that he tried to dance a little jig, and almost succeeded. "I shall sleep under the straw stack tonight," Woot decided, after he had eaten some of the vegetables from the garden. And in fact he slept very well, with the two Tin Men and the Scarecrow sitting silently beside him, and Polychrome away somewhere in the moonlight dancing her fairy dances. At daybreak the Tin Woodman and the Tin Soldier took occasion to polish their bodies and oil their joints, for both were exceedingly careful of their personal appearance. They had forgotten the quarrel due to their accidental bumping of one another in the invisible country, and being now good friends, the Tin Woodman polished the Tin Soldier's back for him, then the Tin Soldier polished the Tin Woodman's back. For breakfast the Wanderer ate crisp lettuce and radishes, and the Rainbow's Daughter, who had now returned to her friends, sipped the dewdrops that had formed on the petals of the wild flowers. As they passed the little house to renew their journey, Woot called out, "Goodbye, Mr. and Mrs. Swine." The window opened and the two pigs looked out. "Pleasant journey," said the Professor. "Have you any children?" asked the Scarecrow, who was a great friend of children. "We have 9," answered the Professor, "but they do not live with us, for when they were tiny piglets the Wizard of Oz came here and offered to care for them and to educate them. So we let him have our 9 tiny piglets, for he's a good wizard and can be relied upon to keep his promises." "I know the 9 tiny piglets," said the Tin Woodman. "So do I," said the Scarecrow. "They still live in the Emerald City, and the Wizard takes care of them and teaches them to do all sorts of tricks." "Did they ever grow up?" inquired Miss Squealina Swine in an anxious voice. "No," answered the Scarecrow. "Like all other children in the Land of Oz, they will always remain children. And in the case of the tiny piglets, that is a good thing, because they would not be nearly so cute and cunning if they were bigger." "But are they happy?" asked Mrs. Swine. "Everyone in the Emerald City is happy," said the Tin Woodman. "They can't help it." Then the travelers said good bye and climbed the side of the basin that was toward Mount Munch.
End of chapter 20.